At 03:18 on the morning of June 30th, 1944, over the North Atlantic, Kapitänleutnant Jakob Haller clung to wreckage 340 miles west of Ireland. U-780 had survived 21 war patrols across 18 months of operations. Its loss rate matched the fleet average. 63% of all U-boats never returned. The torpedo had struck aft, flooding 3 compartments in under 90 seconds, faster than training predicted. In the communications log, recovered months later, the final entry read simply, 316 HRs hit, flooding aft. The water was 4 degrees Celsius, survival time, estimated 20 minutes without flotation. Haller counted 32 men in the darkness. They had been 47 at dive stations. The wind carried the smell of diesel oil across black water. Above them, clouds obscured any stars. No moon, no horizon. Around them, the Atlantic moved in swells, 3 meters high. The radio mast had gone down with the conning tower. No distress signal had been sent. The explosion came at 03:14, 4 minutes before Haller reached the surface. U-780 had been running submerged at periscope depth, tracking a convoy reported 8 hours earlier by Kriegsmarine intelligence. The British destroyer HMS Keppel, part of Escort Group B2, had detected the submarine on Type 144 sonar at 2,800 yards. Commander William Thompson ordered depth charges set to 150 and 250 feet. The first pattern missed by 40 meters. The second did not. Haller had been in the control room when the stern lifted and the lights failed. Water pressure burst through the after torpedo room hatch before anyone could seal it. Lieutenant Schmidt, the engineering officer, had been checking the diesel exhaust system. He made it through the watertight door. 3 machinists did not. The boat lost trim immediately, bow rising as water filled the aft compartments. Haller ordered emergency ballast blow. Compressed air screamed through the pipes. For 18 seconds, the boat climbed. Then the remaining air ran out. The bow tilted forward and U-780 began its final dive. Haller gave the order to abandon ship at 03:16. The hatch wheel turned hard, sea pressure fighting against them. Cold air hit his face as he climbed out onto the tilting deck. Men were already in the water, swimming away from the vortex they knew was coming. Haller was the last through the hatch. He jumped clear as the conning tower slipped beneath the surface. The suction pulled at his legs, but he kicked hard, breaking free. When he surfaced, gasping, the U-boat was gone. Only debris remained. Wooden planking, life vests, a floating oil slick that burned their eyes. The survivors called out in the darkness, voices strained and desperate. Haller swam toward the nearest cluster of men, his flight jacket heavy with seawater. 32 men had made it out. Haller counted them twice, shouting names into the wind. The cold penetrated immediately. Not the sharp cold of winter air, but the deep invasive cold of North Atlantic water in summer, still hovering near freezing. Hypothermia onset. Predicted at 12 to 15 minutes for an average male without thermal protection. They had life vests, kapok-filled Mae Wests issued 3 months prior, but no raft had surfaced with them. Schmidt found a section of wooden decking, 3 meters long, and 4 men grabbed hold. Others clung to floating debris, ammunition crates, a section of bunk frame, anything that provided buoyancy. Haller held onto a canvas equipment bag that had somehow inflated with trapped air. His fingers were already losing sensation. Around him, men began to shake uncontrollably. The first stage. Schmidt's voice came through the darkness. Radio status? There was no radio. The long-range transmitter had been in the conning tower, now 200 meters down. The emergency set had been stored in the forward torpedo room, flooded in the first 30 seconds. They had no flares. The signal pistol had gone down with the boat. Haller calculated HMS Keppel would be hunting for survivors, but only if they believed anyone had escaped. British doctrine called for depth charge, follow-up after a confirmed kill. If Keppel assumed total loss, they would return to the convoy. If they suspected survivors, they might search. But searching 340 miles west of Ireland, in darkness, with U-boats still operating in the area, was not standard procedure. The odds were not favourable. Haller did not share this analysis. Instead, he called out, "Stay together, conserve energy, help is coming." The men needed to believe it, even if he did not. By 04 Fardus, 6 men had stopped responding to calls. They floated in their life vests, heads tilted back, mouths slack. Haller checked each one. No pulse. Core temperature had dropped below sustainable levels. The Atlantic does not kill quickly unless you panic. It kills methodically, degree by degree, shutting down circulation from extremities inward, slowing the heart until it simply stops. The survivors who remained conscious huddled closer, trying to share body heat. A futile effort in water, but instinct demanded it. Schmidt had lost feeling in both legs. A machinist named Vogel kept repeating the Lord's Prayer, voice slurred. Haller forced himself to stay alert. Command required it. If he slipped into hypothermic confusion, the others would follow. He focused on small tasks, counting men, checking the horizon, listening for aircraft. At 0412 he heard it, a low hum, distant, possibly imagined. He strained to isolate the sound from wind and wave noise. There, a rhythmic pulse rising and falling. An aircraft engine, definitely. Single engine, probably reconnaissance. He raised one arm, all the strength he had left, waving at empty sky. The sound grew louder, passed overhead, then faded east. The plane had not seen them. Of course not. Dark water, no lights, minimal profile, visibility from altitude, effectively zero. The hum disappeared entirely. Silence returned, broken only by waves and laboured breathing. But the aircraft had been there. That meant patrol routes were active. Someone was searching, even if not for them specifically. Haller's mind, sluggish now with cold, held on to that fact. It was something. It was enough to keep fighting. He looked at the men around him. Fewer now, the cluster tighter, the gaps wider. "Stay awake," he said, voice barely carrying. "Stay awake." At RAF Coastal Command Station 19, near Kinloss, Scotland, the message arrived at 0432 via encrypted teleprinter. U-boat engaged grid, AK-7342, depth charged, probable kill, debris field observed. Flight Lieutenant Richard Harding read it twice. Probable kill meant unconfirmed. Debris field meant something had surfaced. The distinction mattered. By June 1944, Coastal Command had flown 18,000 anti-submarine sorties, sinking 41, U-boats confirmed, another 23 probable. Harding's squadron, 201 Squadron flying short Sunderland flying boats, specialised in long-range maritime patrol and air-sea rescue. His aircraft, Sunderland 3rd serial number ML778, call sign K for King, had been modified for extended operations, 12-hour endurance, room for 20 survivors if needed. The operations officer, Squadron Leader Barnes, marked the grid reference on the plotting table. 340 miles out, Keppel reported the engagement 90 minutes ago. If anyone's in the water, they don't have long. Harding checked the weather report. Wind northeast at 15 knots, sea state 4, scattered clouds at 2,000 feet, visibility 3 miles, marginal but flyable. He had flown worse. "How many crew on a Type 7? He asked. Barnes consulted the reference manual. 44 to 52, depending on configuration. Harding did the math. If half survived the sinking, optimistic, that meant 20 plus men in 4-degree water for over 2 hours already. Survival curves were not encouraging. He turned to his navigator, Pilot Officer Stevens. "Plot a direct course, maximum cruise speed. We'll orbit the grid and run expanding square search if needed." Stevens bent over the chart table. 2 hours, 10 minutes flight time at 140 knots. Harding nodded. "Get the crew. We launch in 15 minutes. The briefing was short. Sergeant West, the flight engineer, had already prepped the aircraft. The fuel load was calculated for 6 hours on station, enough to search and return with reserves. They would carry extra blankets, medical supplies, hot tea in thermoses, standard rescue loadout. Harding walked out to the hard stand where K for King sat waiting, engines cold, hull dripping from the overnight rain. The Sunderland lifted off at 05:02, spray streaming from the hull as it broke contact with Cromarty Firth. Harding brought the power up slowly. 4 Bristol Pegasus extinct radial engines, each producing 1,065 horsepower, enough to haul 29,000 pounds into the air, but not enough to be careless. The aircraft climbed through low cloud, braking into clear air at 3,500 feet. Dawn was beginning, not sunrise yet, but the sky lightening in the east, deep blue fading to grey. Harding levelled off and trimmed the aircraft for cruise. Fuel flow stabilised at 110 gallons per hour total. Range, approximately 1,200 miles at this speed, less if they had to descend and orbit. Stevens gave him the heading. 268 degrees, almost due west. The Atlantic stretched out below, dark and featureless. In the navigation compartment, Stevens worked with dividers and protractor, refining the course. The grid reference gave them a 10-mile square to search. At 2,000 feet altitude, visual range was approximately 3 miles in good conditions. That meant multiple passes, systematic coverage, and sharp eyes. In the waist gunner positions, 2 observers stood ready. Aircraftman Davies on port, Aircraftman Hughes on starboard. Their job was simple: look for anything that didn't belong. Wreckage, oil slicks, life rafts, men. Harding had flown 14 air-sea rescue missions. He had found survivors on 6 of them. The others, nothing, just ocean. It was a numbers game, and the numbers were rarely kind. At 06:40, Stevens called out, 20 miles to grid reference. Harding began his descent, throttling back, bringing the Sunderland down to 800 feet. Lower was better for visibility, but worse for fuel consumption. He would orbit at this height until they found something or ran low on fuel. Below them, the ocean surface resolved into individual waves, white caps streaking northeast with the wind. Harding keyed the intercom. "All stations, begin search. Mark anything you see." At 06:52, Davies spotted the oil slick, a dark stain spreading across grey water, approximately 400 meters long, narrowing to the southwest. Harding banked toward it, descending further. Oil meant a recent sinking. Fresh diesel fuel, not weathered. He followed the slick northeast, into the wind, looking for the source. At the far end, debris, wooden planking, fabric, something metallic glinting in the early light. Then Hughes called out, "Contact, survivors in the water, starboard side, half a mile." Harding turned hard right, bringing the Sunderland around. There, a cluster of dark shapes against the water, barely visible. He counted 12, maybe 15, too small for a full U-boat crew, but survivors nonetheless. He circled once, low, confirming what he saw: men in life vests, clinging to debris, some waving weakly, alive. Harding's pulse quickened. They had found them. Now came the hard part. A Sunderland could land on water, that was its design, but Sea State 4 was marginal. 3-meter swells, wind-driven chop. The aircraft could handle it, but the landing would be rough, and takeoff even harder with added weight. Harding considered the options. He could drop supplies, rafts, food, blankets, and radio for surface rescue. But surface ships were hours away, possibly longer. The men below had been in the water for nearly 4 hours already. They did not have hours, or he could land, pick them up directly, and fly them out. Risk the aircraft, risk his crew, but save lives now. He made the decision in 3 seconds. West, prepare for water landing. All crew, secure for touchdown. Davies, Hughes, prepare rescue stations. We're going in. Stevens looked at him. Sea state's rough, Skipper. Harding nodded. It is, but they won't last another hour. He lined up into the wind, reduced power, extended flaps. The Sunderland descended toward the waves, hull angled for impact. Harding held the nose up, feeling for the surface. The hull kissed the first wave, bounced, then slammed down hard. Water exploded over the cockpit windows. The aircraft shuddered, slowed, settled. They were down. Harding cut the inboard engines, leaving the outboards running at idle to maintain control. The Sunderland wallowed in the swell, hull rolling 15 degrees port and starboard. West opened the side hatch, and cold wind poured in. Davies and Hughes hauled out the rescue equipment, ropes, life rings, cargo nets. The survivors were 60 meters away, drifting slowly northeast. Harding applied power carefully, using the engines to taxi toward them. Too much power, and the propellers would tear the aircraft apart in the waves. Too little, and they would drift past. He edged forward, watching the hull's response. At 30 meters, Davies threw the first line. It fell short. He coiled it again, threw harder. This time a hand reached up, grabbed hold. Hughes hauled in, pulling the first man toward the hatch. He was young, maybe 20, face grey with cold, eyes unfocused. Davies and Hughes grabbed his arms and dragged him inside. He collapsed on the deck, shaking violently. "Get him aft, blankets and hot tea," Harding ordered. The process repeated, one man at a time, pulled from the water, hauled aboard, carried aft. Some could help themselves, gripping the cargo net and climbing. Others had to be lifted bodily, unconscious or nearly so. Harding counted them as they came aboard. 5, 8, 11, 14. He watched the fuel gauges. Every minute on the water burned fuel. Every kilogram of added weight reduced range. At 18 men, he saw the last one. An older man, officer's insignia barely visible on his soaked jacket. The man gripped the line with both hands but lacked the strength to pull himself closer. West climbed halfway out of the hatch, secured by a safety line, and reached down. He caught the man's wrist and pulled. Together, Davies and Hughes dragged him up and in. The officer rolled onto the deck, gasping, coughing seawater. West closed the hatch. "That's all of them, Skipper. 18 recovered." Harding nodded. 18 out of a crew of 47. The others were gone, drowned in the sinking, lost to hypothermia, drifted too far to find. He throttled up and began the turn into the wind. Takeoff was worse than landing. The Sunderland, now carrying an extra 1,400 kilograms, sat lower in the water. The hull slugged through the waves, reluctant to rise. Harding pushed the throttles forward, full power on all 4 engines. The Pegasus radials roared, propellers biting air. Speed built slowly, 40 knots, 50, 60. The hull began to skip across wave tops, slamming hard with each impact. At 70 knots, Harding eased back on the yoke. The nose lifted, the pounding stopped. They were on the step, hydroplaning, almost flying. 80 knots. He pulled back further. The hull broke free and the Sunderland climbed. Water streaming from the hull. Harding held the climb, gaining altitude, bleeding off speed carefully. At 1,000 feet he leveled off and reduced power to cruise climb. Stevens recalculated fuel. We're £200 over initial estimate due to added weight. Range to base is reduced. We should make it with reserves to spare, but not by much. Harding accepted that. They had the men. That was what mattered. In the aft compartment, West and the crew worked on the survivors. Blankets came out first, wrapped around shaking bodies. Hot tea, still warm from the thermoses, was poured into tin cups and pressed into trembling hands. Those who could swallow drank. Those who couldn't were laid on their sides, monitored for aspiration. The older officer, Harding learned his name was Haller, sat propped against the bulkhead, eyes closed, breathing shallow but steady. A younger man beside him, Schmidt, spoke in broken English. "Thank you, we did not expect." His voice trailed off. West nodded. "You're safe now. Rest." The Sunderland droned eastward, engines steady, course set for Scotland. Harding looked back once, seeing the rows of survivors wrapped in blankets, most sleeping or unconscious, a few staring blankly at the overhead. They were enemies, German submariners who had spent years sinking Allied ships. But right now, in this moment, they were just men pulled from the sea. The war would sort out the rest. For now, they were alive. At 09:20, the Sunderland touched down on Cromarty Firth. Ambulances were waiting, 4 of them, lined up on the access road. Harding taxied to the hard stand and shut down the engines. Medical personnel came aboard immediately, assessing the survivors. 3 were unconscious, core temperatures dangerously low. They were loaded onto stretchers first, rushed to the base hospital. The others walked, slowly, supported by medics, legs unsteady after hours in the water. Haller was among the last to disembark. He paused at the hatch, turned back to Harding, and nodded once. Harding returned the gesture. No words were exchanged. None were needed. Squadron Leader Barnes met Harding at the debriefing room. 18 recovered. Well done. Harding filled out the after-action report. Time on station. Fuel consumed. Survivors' condition. The facts. Barnes read it, signed off, and filed it. By noon, the report would be on someone's desk in London, a single line in the daily summary. 201 Squadron. Recovered 18 survivors from U-780. The war kept moving. At the base hospital, doctors worked quickly. Hypothermia treatment, remove wet clothing, apply warm blankets, monitor heart rate, administer warm intravenous fluids if necessary. 2 of the unconscious men regained consciousness within an hour. The third did not. He died at 11:05, heart failure secondary to severe hypothermia. The medical officer recorded it in the log. 1 fatality post-rescue, unable to restore core temperature. 17 survivors remained. By international convention, they were now prisoners of war, to be held, interrogated, and eventually transferred to POW camps. But first, they needed to recover. The hospital staff treated them without prejudice. Warm beds, hot food, medical attention. The war could wait a few days. Haller lay in a narrow bed, staring at the ceiling. His crew was gone, 30 men lost in the sinking or the water. He had led them, trained them, relied on them. Now they were names in a report, bodies in the Atlantic. The weight of it pressed down, heavier than the seawater had been. On July 2nd, 2 days after the rescue, a British intelligence officer visited the hospital. Captain Morrison from Naval Intelligence Division, tasked with prisoner interrogation, standard procedure. Haller, now stronger, agreed to speak. Morrison was polite, professional. He explained the Geneva Convention protections, asked about U-780's operational history, not for intelligence value, but for records. Haller answered carefully, name, rank, boat designation. He confirmed the sinking, the timeline, the approximate position. He did not discuss orders, tactics, or convoy intelligence, Morrison did not press. This was documentation, not interrogation. The conversation turned, unexpectedly, to the rescue itself. Morrison seemed genuinely curious. "How long were you in the water?" Haller calculated. 3 hours, 40 minutes, approximately. Morrison wrote it down. "And you remained conscious?" Haller nodded. "I had to. I was the commander." Morrison looked up from his notes. "Flight Lieutenant Harding reported visibility was nearly zero. You were fortunate he spotted the oil slick." Haller considered that. Fortune, luck, divine intervention, he did not know which. "We were," he said simply. Morrison closed his notebook. "You'll be transferred to a POW facility within the week. Conditions are adequate. You'll be treated fairly." Haller believed him. The British were not barbarous. Their camps were reported to follow protocol. He would survive, physically at least. Emotionally, psychologically, that was different. Command carried responsibility. 30 men had not returned. That weight did not diminish with rescue. Morrison stood, extended his hand. After a moment, Haller shook it. "Your crew fought well," Morrison said quietly. "For what it's worth." It was worth something. Not much, but something. Morrison left. Haller lay back, exhausted despite 2 days of rest. The hospital ward was quiet, most of the other survivors sleeping. Schmidt, in the next bed, stared at the wall. Neither spoke. Outside, rain fell. Soft Scottish rain, nothing like the North Atlantic. But Haller still heard the waves, felt the cold, saw the faces of men slipping beneath the surface. He would carry that. Forever. The final report, filed by Coastal Command Headquarters on July 5th, contained a single notable statistic. Of 863 U-boats sunk during the war, survivors were recovered from only 237, a rescue rate of 27.5%. U-780 fell into that narrow category. The Kriegsmarine recorded it as lost with survivors recovered by enemy forces. In Germany, families received notification. Missing in action, presumed captured. It was better than lost at sea. At least it left hope. By July 8th, Haller and the 16 surviving crewmen were transferred to POW Camp 18 near Featherstone Park in Northumberland. The camp held approximately 1,500 German prisoners, submariners, Luftwaffe crew, captured soldiers. Conditions were Spartan but humane. Barracks, mess hall, exercise yard. Red Cross parcels arrived monthly. Letters were permitted, censored but delivered. Life became routine. Roll call, work details, evening lockdown. The war continued outside the wire. Haller heard reports through new arrivals. D-Day, the push across France, Allied bombing intensifying. Germany was losing. He had known it intellectually before U-780 went down. Now, isolated and imprisoned, the reality solidified. The war would end. They would be released. Eventually, he wrote letters to his parents, to the families of his lost crew. The letters came back censored, black ink obscuring anything deemed sensitive, but some words made it through. "I am well. We are being treated fairly. I think of you." Small comforts. Schmidt adapted better than most. He worked in the camp workshop, repairing furniture, keeping busy. Others struggled. Depression, nightmares, the psychological toll of survival guilt. One machinist, Vogel, attempted to escape in September. He was caught within 2 miles, returned to camp, given 14 days solitary confinement. After that, he stopped trying. Haller spent hours in the camp library, reading what books were available. History, mostly, literature, anything to occupy his mind. At night, lying on his bunk, he still heard the Atlantic. The cold never entirely left. He wondered about Harding, if the pilot thought about that morning, if the rescue had been routine or significant to him. He would never know. The war in Europe ended on May 8th, 1945. News reached the POW camps within hours, shouted through the wire by British guards, confirmed by camp commanders over loudspeakers. Germany had surrendered unconditionally. The Third Reich was finished. In the camps, reactions varied. Some prisoners wept, others stood silent, processing the magnitude of defeat. A few cheered. The war was over. They would go home. Haller felt only emptiness. He had fought for 5 years, lost his boat and his crew, spent 11 months as a prisoner. Now it was done. And what had been achieved? Nothing he could see. Germany lay in ruins, cities bombed to rubble, the Reich dismantled. His war had been for nothing. Repatriation took months. The camps did not empty immediately. There were negotiations, logistics, prioritization, civilians first, then wounded, then enlisted men, then officers. Haller waited. In September 1945, his name appeared on the repatriation list. He packed his few belongings, letters, a small book, a photograph of his parents sent through the Red Cross. On September 19th, he and 47 other prisoners boarded a truck convoy headed to Southampton. From there, they would take a ship to Cuxhaven. The journey across the Channel was calm, nothing like the North Atlantic in 1944. Haller stood at the rail, watching England disappear behind them. He felt no hatred. The British had fought their war. He had fought his. Both had done what was asked. The British had won. That was the arithmetic of war. Germany, when he saw it again, was unrecognizable. Cuxhaven had been bombed repeatedly. Buildings stood gutted, streets filled with rubble. People moved like ghosts, thin, exhausted, hollow-eyed. This was defeat. Haller made his way to his family home in Hamburg. The neighborhood had been destroyed in the firestorm raids of 1943. His parents' house was gone, just a foundation and a chimney remaining. Neighbors told him his parents had survived, evacuated to the countryside. He found them 2 days later, living in a displaced persons camp near Lüneburg. The reunion was quiet, almost subdued. Too much had been lost for grand emotion. Haller rebuilt slowly. Germany in 1945 and 1946 was a nation in shock, cities ruined, economy shattered, millions displaced or dead. He found work as a laborer, clearing rubble in Hamburg. It was physical, mindless, exhausting. It kept him occupied. He did not speak much about the war. When asked, he said only that he had served in the Kriegsmarine, that his boat had been sunk, that he had been captured. People did not press for details. Everyone had lost something. In 1948, he received a letter, forwarded through several addresses before reaching him. The return address was Scotland. He opened it carefully. The handwriting was precise, the English clear. Dear Kapitänleutnant Haller, I hope this letter finds you well. My name is Richard Harding. I was the pilot who pulled you from the water in June 1944. I have thought often about that day and wondered if you survived the war. I am writing to let you know that I hold no animosity, and I hope you have found peace. If you wish to correspond, I would welcome it. Respectfully, R. Harding. Haller read the letter 3 times. He had not expected this contact from the man who had saved his life. He did not know how to respond. What could he say? Thank you seemed inadequate. An explanation of his survival guilt seemed self-indulgent. In the end, he wrote simply, Dear Flight Lieutenant Harding, I received your letter. I survived the war and have returned to Germany. I think of that morning often as well. You gave me and my men a chance we did not deserve. I am grateful. I do not know if peace is possible, but I am trying. With respect, J. Haller. He mailed the letter and did not expect a response. But 6 weeks later, another letter arrived, and then another. Over the years, the correspondence continued, infrequent, never deeply personal, but steady. 2 men who had been enemies, connected by a single morning in the North Atlantic. They never met in person. Perhaps that was for the best. The letters were enough. In the archives of RAF Coastal Command, the after-action report for Sunderland ML778, dated June 30th, 1944, occupies a single page. 18 survivors recovered. 1 fatality post-rescue. Aircraft returned safely. Total flight time, 4 hours 32 minutes. The report includes no commentary, no reflection, just facts, logged and filed. U-780's loss was recorded in Kriegsmarine records as operational casualty number 647 of 863 total U-boat losses. 30 men killed in action or lost at sea. 17 captured, later repatriated. The boat itself remains on the seabed, 340 miles west of Ireland, depth approximately 200 meters. It has never been located by salvage operations. In 1974, 30 years after the sinking, Harding visited Germany for the first time. He did not contact Haller. He simply wanted to see the country, to understand the place his former enemies had come from. He walked through rebuilt Hamburg, toured the maritime museums, stood at the harbour watching ships come and go. He thought about the war, how close it had been, how different the world might have looked if a few decisions had gone differently. He never flew again after leaving the RAF in 1946. He became a teacher, married, had 3 children. He did not speak much about the war, except to say he had served. When students asked if he had seen combat, he said yes, but did not elaborate. Haller lived until 1983. He worked in Hamburg's shipyards after the rubble clearing ended, eventually becoming a foreman. He never remarried, never had children. He kept Harding's letters in a wooden box, along with a single photograph of U-780's crew, taken in 1943 before the final patrols. When he died, his belongings were sorted by distant relatives. The letters were found, read, and preserved. They reside now in a small maritime museum in Cuxhaven, part of an exhibit on U-boat operations. The placard reads, "Correspondence between enemies, 1948-1979. The exhibit does not explain further. It does not need to. The letters speak for themselves.